Today by welcoming our special guests. We have, I think, people from the Democratic Party. I think we've got folks from the Republican Party. This was open to the public. These are not guests of ours. They were not invited, but all are welcome. I am joined this morning by members of our team and by a Texas Ranger, members of the state's greatest and long-serving law enforcement agency. I'm joined by Texas Ranger Ryan Christian. By Ryan Christian. I always want to add that to his name. By our first assistant, David Mitchum. By Mike Levine, our public corruption prosecutor. And George Jordan, also a prosecutor with our public corruption division. I want to thank them for what has been a long and thorough investigation of the 2022 election. General election. You know, anytime that two or more affidavits are filed by citizens in the state of Texas complaining about an election violation, by law, the district attorney is required to investigate. That is what happened in this election. Multiple affidavits were filed, sent to us immediately after the election, and we did what we always do. We called in an independent investigative agency, the Texas Rangers. The investigation actually began shortly after the election. And we now know, because the Secretary of State's office has done a preliminary report on Harris County's general election of 2022, that there were major problems with that election. We all remember long lines, some disruption in voting because of the machines, but primarily the complaints were lack of paper ballots, that voting locations ran out of paper. Some have said this was directed at one party. Our investigation has not found that to be so. However, the Secretary of State's office has said that the insufficient distribution of ballot paper to polling locations and the loss of an effective monitoring system resulting in those ballot paper shortages at multiple polling locations across Harris County and on election day is attributed to a cessation of voting at certain locations. You can look at this public report and find what the Secretary of State's office found and reported as their findings publicly to support them, why they found what they found. Now, we know that voting was disrupted. We know that there are some people in Harris County who did not get to vote. We know this was a failure in terms of an election that the government has a responsibility to run effectively, ethically, and most importantly, accurately. Here's what the criminal investigation found, because while we didn't know how it happened, now we do. Defendant Daryl Blackburn, who worked in the now defunct Elections Administrator's Office, has been charged with 6 felony charges, 5 of them tampering with a document, 1 theft by public official. This individual was specifically assigned to see that paper was allocated properly in all of the polling locations. He had other responsibilities equally as important, but this is really the nuts and bolts of the election, the allocation of paper. And it is at the heart of much of what the problem was back in November of 2022. Unfortunately, under the not-so-watchful eye of Isabel Longoria and later Clifford Tatum, Mr. Blackburn represented that he worked full-time for Harris County, while in truth, he worked a second full-time job elsewhere. The result is he didn't do his job for Harris County. Can't do 2 full-time jobs and give them the credit and the attention that they need. You may remember that Isabel Longoria was appointed. She had not been employed prior to her appointment, and she left in ignominy after the primary election of 2022. She was followed by Clifford Tatum, an individual who remains employed with Harris County in Precinct 2. Now, while working for the elections office, Mr. Blackburn not only stole thousands of dollars from Harris County in the sense that he lied on timesheets, much more importantly, he stole individuals' rights to vote, a basic constitutional right in our democracy, because people on both sides were delayed in their voting, halted in their voting, rerouted in their voting. I don't know that we'll actually know the damage there. But it's compounded by the loss of public trust in our election system here in Harris County. That is the real cost, and it is priceless. You know, it's interesting that the greed of one person, where checks and balances have been removed, where folks like Mr. Blackburn were allowed to work from home. I'll tell you, the scheme was crude in terms of stealing from the county. Nothing sophisticated here. And yet the consequences were massive. Some of those consequences are that there have been hundreds of thousands of dollars spent in terms of investigations. Not just the cost of the Texas Rangers and our prosecutors, but the Secretary of State's office and countless private litigants. The millions lost, though, does not compare to the damage done in terms of whether people will feel good about going to vote, and we want them to. By holding Darrell Blackburn criminally responsible, we can at least attribute criminal responsibility to this individual, a public servant who did not serve, who instead fleeced taxpayers for his salary, and we paid a much greater consequential result for his actions. I do want to say that the investigation found no evidence of intent to impact the outcome of the election for either party. But it is undeniable that there is a lot of evidence to show that Mr. Blackburn's crime did impact the election. We know that the issue remains open in the civil courts, in that a new election has been ordered in the 180th District Court and is scheduled for May of 2025. And so the long-term consequences of Darrell Blackburn's actions and the failure to appropriately run and supervise an office by two appointed officials, not elected by the public, cost Harris County residents a great deal. We hope it didn't cost you your vote. We want you to vote again. And we want you to know that the biggest responsibility of the district attorney's office is not to favor one party or the other. It is to do our job objectively in getting down to the facts of what really happened. And we rely upon the Texas Rangers to help us do that. I rely upon our public corruption prosecutors, and that is why it is clearly extremely important to look at these crimes in a non-partisan way and go based on the evidence by applying the law, which is our oath in Texas as prosecutors. To give you details about the scheme of the theft and the scope of it, Mike Levine will come forward now.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Madam District Attorney. Thank you, Texas Ranger Ryan Christian. Thank you, DA Investigator George Jordan. Thank you to our paralegals and so many other folks who worked a lot of hours over a lot of months. There is a 17-page probable cause statement that goes into far greater detail than I will be able to go into today. If it's not on the district clerk website yet, I'm sure it will be by morning. I will just give a brief summary of what it is that we have found. The charged defendant was hired by Harris County initially as a temp employee and then full-time by the Elections Administration in April of 2021. He was in charge of calculating allocations for Harris County elections. That means how many voting, what they call duos, the machines you vote on, as well as ballot paper. He was charged with doing this both through early voting and then on Election Day in November of 2022. Ultimately, his miscalculations regarding ballot paper caused major disruptions on Election Day, November 8th, 2022, of which most of you are aware. As Diog mentioned, by law, when 2 or more people complained via sworn affidavits, which did happen here, this office is required to investigate. That's what happened. Now, to be clear, and I want to be very clear about this, this investigation has revealed no evidence that anyone intentionally acted in any way to suppress voter turnout or to close certain voting locations based on known voting tendencies, nor did anyone take any action that we found with an intent to sway an election. The motive here was much simpler and much older. It was greed. In the course of investigating, we learned that this defendant acquired a high-paying oil and gas industry job in October of 2021. In fact, our own DA investigator Jordan really stumbled upon while reviewing social media. Mr. Blackburn then worked 2 full-time jobs at the exact same dates, at the exact same times, at the exact same hours for 15 months. This is not somebody who said they left work at 3 and left at 4. This is 15 months of sustained double dipping on timesheets. He worked exclusively from home for Harris County, yet frequently worked in person at his other higher-paying job in the Woodlands. He claimed the same time on timesheet after timesheet. That gave rise to the 5 tampering with government document charges we have filed. Those are state jail felonies. They're punishable by up to 2 years in state jail. And finally, and most offensively, in May of 2022, this defendant requested paid parental leave. That is a Harris County benefit that allows a new parent to take 12 weeks of paid leave without having to use comp and vacation and sick time. In the case of this defendant, it essentially amounted to a nearly $21,000 bonus to which he was not entitled. A diligent Harris County HR employee made sure to ask him to sign a specific provision right before he took that leave, saying he was aware of the policy. He knew he could not work another full-time job, or any job for that matter, while on paid parental leave. At the time he signed that document, he had already been working another full-time job for 6 months. He continued to do it throughout the period of his paid parental leave from the county. That's given rise to the other charge we filed, which is known as theft by public servant. It is a 3rd-degree felony, punishable by up to 10 years in TDC. We had our first setting in court today. Bonds were set at $40,000 on that theft charge, $5,000 on each of the 5 tampering charges. Thank you.
Could you spell his name?
Yes, Blackburn is like the color black, B-U-R-N.
And Darryl?
Darryl, D-A-R-R-Y-L.
And do you have a date of birth on him?
I do, but I'm not going to give that right now. I'm sure it's going to be in the PC statement that you'll see.
We're going to talk about election.